Alrighty, shalom, shalom, brethren. Let me see if I have got actually a live connection here. I believe I do, but yes, indeed, there we are. Excuse me for the delay, friends. Shalom and welcome to this episode here of the Watchdog. I am your host today, CJ Cox, and we are going to go on another relatively interesting doozy of a story here today. Excuse me, the conversation at hand is actually going to be once again pertaining to mainly Israeli politics, not so much American politics, but of course we understand just how important that is to global politics at large. It is, in a very real sense, the center of the world, according to a lot of people. And so as a result, what happens in the political sphere there over in Israel is very important. So we're going to look into that here today. I'm going to go ahead and give a little bit of time to see if anybody is interested in showing up in the live chat to see this live here. I do once again want to apologize, friends, for the amount of time that it actually took. Unfortunately, I'm just absolutely terrible about having some sort of an issue or other. So, that's just the way it seems to be going. But nonetheless, here we are. We are live. Shalom, shalom. This will be interesting. So our topic today, to get specific, is Israeli MK, which means member of the Knesset, and Rabbi Yehudah Glick. Yehudah Glick has recently been in the news because he has decided that he wants to actually run for president of Israel. Now, to give you a little bit of background, president of Israel isn't quite the same thing as president of the United States, right? First off, their system of government is different than ours. But so let me just give a little bit of an explanation as to that system of government actually first off, and then we'll go into how their presidency is different. So in the Israeli system of government, they have a parliamentary system which functions basically by having people vote for individual parties rather than individual members of that party. And then the party will actually choose representatives to, of course, represent itself in the various seats. So, for example, they have 120 seats in their Knesset, but let's just use the number 100 so that it's relatively simplistic. Let's say that 40% of the vote went to the right-wing party, 30% of the vote went to the left-wing party, 20% of the vote went to a third party, so on and so forth, right? So that would mean you'd have 40 different members given to this right party, 30 to the left, 20 to the third, and so on and so forth until you actually filled up all of the positions. And then the party would actually be the ones who are individually choosing who those members actually are. Once you have that set up, it is then up to the members of that government, if they do not actually get a majority vote, which they virtually never do, right, to form a majority government, which means 51 or more in this particular example, right, but just more than half so that they can actually pass something. Usually this is done by making some sort of a deal or two with different political parties who may be closer ideologically to what you believe, but separated for such and such a reason. Maybe they're nationalistic. Maybe, they have some different belief about the environment, whatever it happens to be, right? So you make these deals to form these majority governments, and with these unities, try to move forward with this new government that's been elected, right? And then those people within that particular government that's been set up outside of the opposition, because of course those in the minority will set up an opposition, they then elect the prime minister, right? Now the prime minister is what we would consider an equivalent to our president, although in a lot of ways he's somewhat equivalent to a speaker of the house and things like that as well. It's, a little interesting in those regards, what kind of powers the prime minister has. But to be specific with it, he would be considered the head of government, right? Not necessarily the head of state. Now, those two are one and the same here in the United States. It actually doesn't end up meaning much in the state of Israel, but we would consider him to be, by technicality, the head of government, and therefore the most equivalent to our own president. The current prime minister, of course, is Bibi Netanyahu, or Benjamin Netanyahu is his real name. Now, the president position in this position is a separate election from this entire process I have just described to you. And this is what Yehudah Glick wants to run for. The presidential position is technically the head of state, But the head of state in Israel is a very ceremonial position. So, for example, the head of state will call the prime minister and nominate him, right? Even though really he's actually elected by the Knesset, which is their version of the parliament. He'll do the actual ceremony of putting the prime minister forward and so on and so forth, right? And a lot of the things that he does is very similar actually to what is done actually by the Queen of England in their system. Not necessarily identical, but you kind of, you get the gist of it there. It's a very ceremonial position where really what you're doing is a lot of pomp and circumstance and not a lot of actual policy decision. The executive power is actually vested in the prime minister. Nonetheless, though, the president does actually carry a lot of diplomatic weight, a lot of symbolic weight. He certainly has a lot of pull over the people in a media sense, right? And he's kind of similar in a lot of ways to, like I said, the Queen of England in that way. Similar in a lot of ways to, these priests and groups like the Mormon Church and the Catholic Church and stuff like that too, in the sense that they don't have any actual power as far as like being, powerful over the government, but what they say has a lot of sway over the populace, right? Now, with that context, Yehudah Glick wants to run for this president of Israel position. So before we get into that, let's do some background on who exactly Yehudah Glick is, why this is important, and why this is something we should be focused on. Shalom to all those in the chat. I'm not going to go ahead and look at the moment, but I will go ahead and acknowledge you guys at the end. I appreciate you guys being here. Please do like, share, subscribe if you have not done so, and let's get right into this. So the first thing we're going to be looking at today, I'm going to share my screen here in just a moment, is actually a brief biography, if you will, of Yehudah Glick. Right. So we're going to go ahead and go through. This is from the Knesset's actual website, knesset.gov.il. Right. And it's a biography of Yehudah Joshua Glick. And this will give you an idea of who he is, where he stands, and why this is something that is interesting to us here in the States. So his date of birth was on the 20th of November 1965 here in the good old United States. This doesn't actually say specifically, but it was New York that he was born in. Now, this is, of course, a very interesting thing because being an American-born rabbi, that means he's obviously an English speaker very fluently. It means he obviously has somewhat of an establishment here in the States. And that's not necessarily in and of itself a bad thing, right? It's or even a concerning thing or anything like that, right? I just want to point that out. But it's just something that is obviously interesting and gives him a certain, a certain level of, shall you say, influence that maybe not every other Israeli politician would have. His education is bachelor's degree in Bible studies from Jerusalem College, a master's in Jewish history from Touro College, tour guide certificate from the Ministry of Tourism, and graduate of the Tetz Stone and Makor Chaim yeshivas, as well as Har Etzion and Othniel. He has military service in the framework of the Hasider. I'm not particularly good at pronouncing these. I apologize. Or Hester, Yeshiva, served in the Armored Corps and later in the Intelligence Corps from 1986 to 1989. He completed a combat medic course and served in the IDF reserves as a combat medic and as a regular defense soldier. So obviously, like most Israeli citizens, he has significant military service and was actually a member of the Intelligence Corps, which is interesting. Now, what we'll get into in this biography, and one of the things that I want to note right now real quick for you guys, is what he has actually become popular for. The thing that he actually originally became popular for, and we're going to go and look into some of his other stuff after this, like the Wikipedia article and stuff like that, just to give you guys an idea of who he is, right? The thing he actually originally got popular for is the Temple Mount movement that he had actually founded and spearheaded and spearheads to this day. And the Temple Mount movement basically seeks to restore a ability of Jewish peoples to pray at the Temple Mount, which is, of course, the holiest site in Judaism. Currently, it is the third holiest site in Islam, right? And as a result, it has been somewhat contentious for Jews to actually pray anywhere there except for at what has been known as the Wailing Wall, or commonly also known as the Western Wall. This is commonly known as the status quo of the Temple Mount. Now, obviously, there is a certain level of really just disgusting political maneuvering going on there, that the Jews are withheld from praying at their first holiest site because it happens to be the third holiest site of a conquering nation, right? That's obviously somewhat repulsive. And, we can imagine if, somebody had the audacity to build a synagogue or a church in Mecca where the Dome of the Rock is, right? What kind of a problem the Muslims would have there. So one certainly sympathizes with Yehudah Glick and with the movement that he had, wanted to establish here. The thing that's obviously concerning about it, though, is there is a reason why people have endorsed this status quo for so long, and it is the potential for global governance, for a World War III-like scenario, for returns to crusades and jihads and gigantic religious wars and things of that nature, right? If you were actually to set up a differentiation from this status quo and some sort of a system where you actually can go to the Temple Mount to pray. Of course, one of the big concerns for me personally, and I already hinted to it, is this idea of globalism, right? When you have a person like Yehudah Glick, who is very interested in making Jerusalem sort of a international nation, or international city rather, right? Because one of the big portions of his movement, as we'll see in this video, or not in this video, in this episode I'm giving to you, right? Is he is down with actually getting the whole thing internationalized and making it a city for all faiths, right? And so when you have a movement that is dedicated to actually setting up something like a change of the status quo, not only for Jews, but actually in the end for all peoples, you certainly see why one would be concerned with something like a globalistic religion in this sense, especially considering some of the stuff that we've reported on this program before, such as, Shimon Peres with Pope Francis, right? And the Abraham Accords that we talked about yesterday, and so on and so forth. So that's just to give you a general idea as to what Yehudah Glick's claim to fame is. I feel like I'm somewhat rambling and maybe not making as much sense as I could, so I'm going to just continue to read the article. But nonetheless, just want to give you guys a little bit of background as to who this person is, why this is something that's interesting to us, and so on and so forth. So Yehudah Glick was born in New York on the 25th of Cheshvan 5726, which corresponds to November 20th, 1965 on the Gregorian calendar. In 1974, he immigrated to Israel, being 9 years old, with his parents and 6 siblings. His father, Professor Shimon Glick, managed the internal medicine department of Soroka Medical Center and was one of the founders of the Faculty of Health Sciences at Ben-Gurion University in the Negev. Yehudah Glick served in the IDF between 1986 and 1989 as part of the Hester Yeshiva that he attended. Glick initially served in the Armed Corps and later in the Intelligence Corps. He completed a combat medics course and served as a combat medic and regional defense soldier during reserve duty. Glick holds a bachelor's in Bible studies from Jerusalem College and a master's in Jewish history, from Touro College. He is also a licensed guide for the Ministry of Tourism, and for 10 years he attended the Tetz Stone, Machor Chaim, Har Etzion, and Othniel yeshivas. I am more than certain those are pronounced terribly, so I apologize. Let me see here. See if I can get this zoomed in a little bit, because I'm having trouble reading it. I'm more than certain you guys are probably having trouble reading it. How do you zoom in on this? You would think that I was not as technologically illiterate as I am, but I am I just noticed Brother Nicholas there in the chat also saying zoom in. That's funny, but nonetheless, I guess I'm not 100% sure how you do that. Well, Brother Nicholas, I have actually a laptop with the touch on the he says click on the full screen icon on StreamYard too. Also, shalom, John Maddox, shalom, Nightmare. I don't actually have a mouse. I have the laptop with the thing in the center, right? So I don't know if that necessarily works. I guess I'll try it still. No. Type right in browser should be an option for Zoom. Yep, I do see that. Thank you there, Brother John. I appreciate that. There we go. How's that looking for you guys? It's looking pretty solid for me now. I'll go ahead and zoom it in a little bit further there. I am actually using the Microsoft replacement. John, I can't remember exactly what it's called because they just came out with it, but it's the replacement for Microsoft. So I do have it zoomed in here on my side. I don't know if that's actually showing up on your guys' side. Nonetheless, if it's, maybe it is, and I just don't have it zoomed enough. Let me see if I can get it zoomed in a little bit farther. Yeah, Microsoft Edge, exactly. Exactly. So, sorry, by the way, for anybody who is not watching this live, who sees this getting derailed. I am technologically illiterate, and so yeah, as a result, I need to ask the live chat for some help here. So, and I appreciate you guys, by the way. So let's go ahead and continue here into this. Glick began as a teacher, even serving on several occasions as an emissary for the State of Israel to former USSR countries. In 1996, Glick began working in the Ministry of Immigration and Absorption, filling several positions, including spokesperson for Minister Yoel Edelstein, Director of the Public Diplomacy Department in the Ministry, Director of the Jewish Identity Unit, and Director of the Ashkelon and South Israel region. In 2005, after 10 years of work in the ministry, Glick resigned in protest of the Gaza disengagement plan. Full screen option in StreamYard. So is that this? It takes a while for it to actually register where I'm looking at it on my phone, so I'm not 100% sure when I actually click something. I have to pause for a minute and see it register on my phone, which is where you guys would see it registered. But yeah, all right, there it is. Awesome. So, between 2005 and 2009, Glick served as Director General of the Temple Institute. He was also head of the Hester Yeshiva in Otniel and responsible for the Foreign Students Project. He also founded the Temple Mount Heritage Foundation, existing since 2009, and has worked as a tour guide and lecturer on the Bible, Jerusalem, the Temple, and the Temple Mount, although I actually mixed those up. So, little bit of brief context. First off, what is the Temple Institute? Well, I'm reading off the Wikipedia page here. I don't have it up on the screen for you guys, but I'm only going to be reading the very beginning of the Wikipedia page, and I will actually provide... You know what? Actually, no, I'm not going to do that because you guys need to know exactly who the Temple Institute is and who this guy was director of. So just a moment. The Temple Institute... we'll go to their Wikipedia page to give you a brief synopsis, and then, as you saw, their very own website there, we'll go to that. So, the Temple Institute, known in Hebrew as the Mechan HaMekadash, if I pronounced that terribly, I apologize, is an organization in Israel focusing on the endeavor of establishing the Third Temple. Let me say that one more time. Is an organization in Israel focusing on the endeavor of establishing the Third Temple. Let's go back to this really quick. What did it say? He served as Director General from 2005 to 2009 of this Temple Institute. So you guys see now, I hope, a little bit of why I am concerned with the potential for him to be the president of Israel, even if it is, right, only a ceremonial position. Let's go back. Its long-term aims are to build, by the way, this is where we're starting right here, friends. Its long-term aims are to build the third Jewish temple on the Temple Mount, on the site currently occupied by the Dome of the Rock, and to reinstate animal sacrificial worship. So not only do they want to actually rebuild the third temple, but they want to reinstate animal sacrificial worship, right? And by the way, they just so happen to know the Levite bloodline, right? That is not something that was ever lost. They don't quite know the Aaronite bloodline, but they might be able to figure it out with advances in genetic technology. Who knows? They also might make it up, right? It's not like people haven't done evil things like that before. So this is something that is coming into play very much for these people, right? It aspires to reach this goal through the study of temple construction and ritual, and through the development of actual temple ritual objects, garments, and building plans suitable for immediate use in the event conditions permit its reconstruction. By the way, fun fact about Wikipedia, you can hover right here to find sources here. A house of prayer for all nations from the Jerusalem Post. We're going to be reading that today, just so you guys are aware. But little fun fact about Wikipedia. Hover over these little numbers and it'll show you the source where it's getting its information. Sometimes citations are needed, of course, but nonetheless. It runs a museum in the Jewish quarter of the Old City in Israel. Source for that is here in case anybody is interested. We're not going to be reading that one, though. But it is definitely a very interesting thing. Forcing the end, why do Pentecostal cattle breeders from Mississippi and an Orthodox rabbi from Jerusalem believe that a red heifer can bring change? That is obviously very interesting, but nonetheless, right, we do have a limited amount of time, so we won't be able to look at everything. It was founded and headed by Rabbi Yisrael Ariel. Its current director general is David, which is obviously a variant of David Schwartz, and the international department is headed by Rabbi Chaim Richman. New York billionaire Henry Swicka, or Swayeka, I'm not sure exactly how you pronounce that, has supported the institute, and the Israeli government has also provided funding. So just to give you guys an idea, right, of who this Temple Mount is. They are an organization focusing on establishing a third temple and reinstating animal sacrifice. They also happen to have backing by the Israeli government, billionaires from the United States, and, by the way, this guy, Yehudah Glick, was a director general for them in 2005 up to 2009, just 1 decade ago. So that's what we're dealing with here. And that's why, of course, it is an incredibly interesting thing to note that this person wants to run for president of Israel. Bear in mind, of course, like we have discussed recently, and as has been on the news a lot, right, that this is in light of the Abraham Accords and Trump's attempt at a Middle East peace plan and the union of the World Council of Churches and the Vatican and so on and so forth, right? So keep in mind all these different things that have been spoken about in the Watchdogs, and I know it was yesterday and then 3 months ago before then, so, I'm asking you to kind of refresh your memory from a while back, and that's my fault. But nonetheless, right, keep in mind this context when we discuss these concerning things about Yehudah Glick. Real quick, though, we're not going to return back to this. I want to move on briefly to show you, because, I know a lot of people don't really trust Wikipedia. So let's go to the Temple Institute's own website, right? Redundancy is, of course, sometimes a very good thing because it hammers into your head the information that we're trying to get out to you. Do not want to subscribe to a weekly newsletter here. I apologize. All right, and let's go ahead and figure out the About Us Statement of Principles for the Temple Institute. Let's see what the Statement of Principles is. The Temple Institute is dedicated to all aspects of the divine commandment for Israel to build a house for God's presence, the Holy Temple, on Mount Moriah in Jerusalem. The range of the Institute's involvement with this concept includes education, research, activism, and actual preparation. Our goal is firstly to restore temple consciousness and reactivate these forgotten commandments. We hope that by doing our part, we can participate in the process that will lead to the Holy Temple becoming a reality once more. So there you see very plainly that they do wish to establish the third temple, and they haven't actually specified what exactly they want as far as ritual, but there does seem to be right, they reactivate these forgotten commands. Of course, what are they indicating? Well, the only commands that have truly been forgotten, right, are animal sacrifice and things that are temple specific like that, right? Everything else, the Jewish people and indeed the Christian people also have been able to do since the destruction of the temple with little to no problem. Why build the temple, they ask. Why this fuss over an ancient, seemingly outdated concept, they ask. What relationship does the Holy Temple have to our world today, they ask. The people of Israel have lived without a temple for nearly 2,000 years and seem to be doing fine without one. We don't seem to need it, and God certainly doesn't, so why think about rebuilding? The Torah's commandments are eternal for now and forever. Isn't it interesting how truths can always be perverted to represent things that maybe we don't necessarily want to support? Which I say, of course, a little bit tongue-in-cheek. Of course, we don't want to support a third temple unless Messiah himself comes back, which, of course, we know he's not going to until this Antichrist figure is already presented to us. But nonetheless, that's actually a conversation for a different video. This is political stuff. This is watchdog stuff, not necessarily religious stuff. But, of course, if you guys aren't aware of the fact that my religion does color a lot of my political theories, then, you know, I don't know what you're listening to. But at the same time, you see, part of the reason I try to maintain the secularity, I don't even know if that's a word, so I don't know why it's so difficult for me or why I tried so hard to say it. But nonetheless, is because I do kind of want people out there who are not Christians to understand, like, there's grave concern over this, regardless of whether or not you believe in prophecies from the book of Revelation and the book of Daniel and so on, right? These things, politically speaking, are important regardless. And you need to understand that, right? And perhaps understanding that leads you a little bit closer to my worldview. Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. I guess that's up to you and between you and God. But nonetheless, I just want to let you know why it is that I do want people like atheists and people who are not necessarily believers to understand the concerns that we have here over things like rebuilding a third temple, right? But nonetheless, let's continue. Nothing can be further from the truth, they say. Maimonides teaches in Sefer Ingret HaShemad that the performance of all the commandments are not dependent on the coming of the Messiah. They are to be fulfilled, at all times. God does not change his mind nor nullify any of the commandments, including in the Torah, which were given once for all time. In lieu of temple service, we may observe various remembrance of these commandments, but that is all they are, merely gestures of nostalgia. And of course, this is a perverted version of biblical truth. I don't want to get too deep into it, but basically the long and short of it is the Messiah, i.e. Jesus Christ, has done away with any sort of a necessity for temple sacrifice, right? We are now considered to be temples of the indwelling of the Holy Spirit, right? Temples of God ourselves, and there is no need for a physical place to restrict, quote unquote, God's presence, which of course is something that I say as a kind of colloquial thing, right? You don't literally restrict God's presence, but nonetheless. Fish out of water. But we fool ourselves if we think the state of Judaism today without the temple is normal. On the contrary, we are like fish out of water. If 1/3 of all Torah's commandments center on the temple, it would seem that biblical observance in the temple's absence is but a skeleton of what God has intended it to be. Our relationship with God. At this one place on earth, unlike any other, the one place that the Creator himself chose to rest his presence, the rectification of man's connection with God takes place. All people were able to come to the temple to partake in this direct and fulfilling bond. Notice this point. All people were able to come to the temple to partake in this direct and fulfilling bond. This is not simply to worship the God of Israel, my friends. This is a globalist agenda. And of course it always is. Right? When are people ever interested in not actually establishing their power over the globe? I swear we have a whole bunch of comic book villains running the nations across the world. It's ridiculous. Excuse me one second. I'm going to take a drink of my tea. All right. And by the way, real quickly, I just want to point out, Brother Nicholas saying in there it is important news. Right, it is. And I would like to point out to my brethren out here, if you could, please do share these videos. I do not say that to toot my own horn. What I do say that to say, though, is unfortunately, I do not know of anybody who is doing political news at this time who is actually reporting on these kinds of things. It seems to be very, very, under the table, so to speak. The Times of Israel does a lot of reporting on it. And by the way, I shout them out as well as a news source for all of my brethren out there, so that you might be able to actually look at these things for yourselves. But they're actually not an English news source. They're a Hebrew news source that just happens to also publish their stuff in English. So that just kind of gives you an idea of how little people are actually talking about this, especially stateside. But nonetheless, a new era of universal harmony. What? No way. That's definitely not what it says. You made that up, Jay. There's no way, Jay. This isn't about globalism, Jay. It's clearly about the Torah and keeping the commandments, Jay. I'm sorry, it's not. A new era of universal harmony. Every prophet of Israel, without exception, prophesied that the temple would be rebuilt. This is actually true. Ushering in a new era of universal harmony and peace, unparalleled in the history of man. This is also true. Of course, they misinterpret it, but nonetheless, I don't want to get too deep into a theological study. We're just looking at the news right now. Thus, the movement to rebuild the Holy Temple is not new. It was born almost 2,000 years ago at the moment of the Second Temple's destruction. For when the Holy Temple stood in Jerusalem, it was the soul of Jewish people and the entire world. And we believe it will be again. Notice they have to tack that on there. And the entire world, right? This is obviously a very, very problematic thing. One of the things I would like to point out is, of course, that there is not actually any specific detail being mentioned here because there never is. Specific detail allows people to understand all of the nitty and gritty of all your plans, right? Rather, you just speak in these, they call them sweet nothings, right? But these platitudes is really a better word because it's not nothing. To try and give you an idea of what exactly they want, but not actually going into full detail as to what it means to establish what they want and how they're going to achieve it, right? The reality of the Jewish experience means that the temple will be rebuilt. Many people who visit the Temple Institute are incredulous and cannot help but exclaim, do you really think that you will live to see the Holy Temple rebuilt? The answer to that question is of little importance. Let us rather recall that Jewish history has a trajectory which began with the patriarch Abraham smashed his father's idols, which, by the way, that is not actually a story from the Bible. That is a story found in later Jewish fiction, and it is not actually true. It's sort of like George Washington and the cherry tree, right? It's a good story. It kind of, gives you a little bit of an idea of the character, but it's not actually historical, right? Nonetheless. That trajectory has spanned for millennia, and it is obvious that we are rapidly approaching climactic times in which the Holy Temple will once again become the focal point for mankind's spiritual focus. Whether this transpires in our generation or not, we can still choose to be active participants and not simply spectators in God's bold plan, for the redemption of Israel and all humanity. So, that's who the Temple Institute is, right? And this man, Yehudah Glick, who wants to run for president in the state of Israel, is indeed a former director of this group and a spearhead of the temple movement, as it is so called. One more thing really quickly before we get back to Yehudah Glick, I want to point out the globalism that is present in this. I clicked on the wrong one. I wanted the Wikipedia article, actually. Globalism that is present in this movement here in this article here, right? A house of prayer for all. Oh, no. Did they take this down? No way. Just a second, friends. Man. That's lame. Oh, well. Nonetheless, you do see Jerusalem Post is posting about this, so I advise you guys read these things. It's time to normalize the Temple Mount. But apparently, that is now a defunct link. I was just using that link. That's so frustrating. Anyways, I apologize, friends. Let's get back now to, you guys get the idea already, right? It's a Temple Institute meant to establish a new era of global harmony between all nations. They already said that much. Yeah, I just wanted to get a little bit more detail for you guys, but nonetheless, stuff happens. Here we are. So let's get into discussing what we can actually find. Yehudah Glick. Let's go back to this man. Oh, wait. No, there is one more thing we did have to check out. My apologies. He also founded the Temple Mount Heritage Foundation. So what is that? Right? We just had a little bit of explanation here as to what exactly we see in the Temple Institute. But what is this Temple Mount Heritage Foundation? Well, the Temple Mount Heritage Foundation was founded by a broad spectrum of representatives of the Israeli Jewish population, unified to end the unconscionable discrimination against Jews on the Temple Mount, Judaism's most holy site. Here, you know what? I'm going to go ahead and put this one here on the screen for you guys again. I always say, you know what? I'm going to read this very quickly, and therefore I don't have to put it on the screen. And then I decide, you know what? People should actually see this in full, so I have to put it on the screen. So I apologize for my somewhat disorganized show. I hope you guys still find it to be useful. At any rate. Here we are. So it was founded by a broad spectrum representative of the Jewish population, unified to end the unconscionable discrimination against Jews on the Temple Mount, Judaism's most holy site. The foundation's vision is to reclaim for Jews the basic civil rights of free access, free worship, and free congregation on the Temple Mount. The Temple Mount Heritage Foundation seeks nothing less than clear, unambiguous Israeli sovereignty on the Temple Mount. This sovereignty must be evidenced and expressed in both word and deed, facilitating Jewish prayer while actively maintaining, protecting, preserving, and developing the greatest site of our national and religious heritage, the site to which we lifted our eyes and yearned with our hearts throughout the long exile and rebirth of Zion. In order to achieve these goals, the Temple Mount Heritage Foundation needs to urgently affect public opinion, primarily in Israel and secondarily in the world. We will accomplish this only with the help of strategic, critical partners in Israel and throughout the Jewish world. Modus operandi: bringing Jews, Israelis to the Temple Mount by subsidizing buses. Subsidizing, by the way, means that the government is going to help pay for it. Making halakhic advice readily available and guiding groups daily. Bringing the Temple Mount to the people. Media, website, parlor meetings, community meetings, workshops, and conferences, as well as providing free guide services to Jews ascending the Mount at all times currently permitted, which, by the way, just so you guys know, if you're a Christian, this group will be successful. I guarantee it, because otherwise the two witnesses cannot possibly preach here. So there we go, actually, with that. By the way, Nightmare, I see you saying check in the history for that Jerusalem Post article. I am going to go ahead and do that, but I'll do that, I think, after this episode, just because I did waste a little bit of time already looking into it. And to be honest, it might end up being for the best to keep this an hour or less, that we don't necessarily get that. But I appreciate the idea there. That certainly is something I will actually do here in a moment. Nonetheless, the Temple Mount Heritage Foundation has already, in the course of a few years, accomplished so much. We now need funding for what we must make a significant year, primarily to create proper infrastructure, personnel for ever-expanding activities, publishing brochures, website development, extended social media reach, intensified lobbying efforts, subsidizing buses from all over Israel, workshops and conferences, and estimated annual cost is about $350,000. Right. So, what is the Temple Institute, which he served as Director General of? It is a group which seeks to reestablish animal sacrifice, the Levitical priesthood, and the Temple Mount. And what is the Temple Mount Heritage Foundation, which he founded? A group which seeks to reestablish prayer of Jewish people at the Temple Mount. And this man now wants to run for president of this state of Israel. Right? So you guys can see, I'm sure, why this is a very important piece of information, right? Why this is something that is certainly worthy of our discussion. And by the way, I actually go ahead and look it up. I think the next election, if I'm not mistaken, is 2021. I think they have 7-year terms, and the last one was in 2014. Yeah, 2021. I just looked it up. So this is going to be a coming up election very soon, right? And remember, this is in the context of wanting to annex parts of Judea and Samaria, Donald Trump's peace plan, WCC and and Catholic Church rather kind of linking up with each other, Abraham Accords, so on and so forth, right? Lots of interesting things happening outside of the states here. Let's continue, though. Since 2008, Glick has been heading the Temple Mount Heritage Foundation, as well as Haliba, the Initiative for Jewish Freedom on the Temple Mount, which he also established. These bodies encourage visits to the Temple Mount, and Haliba has basically the same goals there as the Temple Mount Heritage Foundation. Excuse me. In 2015, ahead of the elections of the 20th Knesset, Glick was placed 33rd on the Likud roster as a representative of Judea and Samaria. In May 2016, he entered the Knesset. On October 29, 2014, as he exited the annual conference of Temple Mount activists at the Temple Mount Heritage Center in Jerusalem, Glick was shot by an Arab resident of Abu Tor. He was taken to the hospital in critical condition, but after a lengthy hospitalization and rehabilitation period, he returned to his public activities. In April 2015, Glick was awarded the Moskowitz Lion of Zion Award. Yehudah Glick is married to Yafi and is the father of 8, including 2 foster children and grandfather to 6, although I believe Yafi has since passed. He lives in Othniel in South Mount Hebron. So, here we are, right? This is who Yehudah Glick is. This is the organizations that he is currently a part of. Obviously, you see this as incredibly interesting news, or at least I hope you do, because it's definitely incredibly interesting news. Links, by the way, will be provided in the description. So let's go ahead and read the article from the Times of Israel, where he said that he was going to run for president, and see if there's anything interesting that we need to pick up on here today. Former MK and Temple Mount activist Yehudah Glick plans to run for president. Controversial U.S.-born figure who broke with some of Likud Party's traditional stances says he's most fit to heal the nation's rifts. A new, somewhat surprising contender has jointed the race to become Israel's next president next year. Yehudah Glick, a former Knesset member and longtime advocate for Jewish rights on Jerusalem's Temple Mount, has told right-wing lawmakers, that he will run for the job when Reuven Rivlin's tenure ends in the summer of 2021. Zaman Yisrael, the Time of Israel's Hebrew language sister site, has revealed, or learned rather. The president, a largely symbolic figure, is elected by Knesset members once every 7 years. Glick, asking the lawmakers to support him, said he was the only candidate who fits the role. Quote, over Rosh Hashanah, I sat with myself for 2 whole days and decided I will run for the job, end quote, Glick told the Knesset members. Quote, I see what is happening today in the nation. I am pained by the divisions and the rifts, end quote. By the way, this is going to be an incredibly important thing considering the fact that he is a member of the Likud, because Likud, being the right-wing party in Israel and the establishment party currently, has a lot of controversy behind it. Likud has made a lot of deals with very radical, politically speaking, Orthodox Jews who have actually gone as far as to even persecute not only Karaite Jews and Messianic Jews, although it hasn't been extreme yet, right? They have also actually gone as far as to start prosecuting Jews of races who they don't necessarily prefer. For example, Ethiopian Jews. On top of that, there has been very, very much known, or at least brought to light, I guess I should say, right, about Benjamin Netanyahu, his wife, and potential fraud that they have been committing. And of course, Benjamin Netanyahu is somebody who I have agreed with for a very long time, but nonetheless, a man committing fraud is a man committing fraud. There's nothing that we can do about that, right? He actually will be seeking, or will be charged rather, with bribery by the Israeli government. And that's something that happened earlier in June. Actually, might have been May, but nonetheless, right? So that's also a problem that Likud is having. Also, Likud has been, at this point, very much on the side of Kahanists. For those of you who are not aware, Meir Kahane, another American-born rabbi, lived in the 70s, 80s, 90s, was a former member of the Knesset, founder of the Kach party. And his idea was annexation of Judea and Samaria and deportation of all of the Arab peoples from Israel, and then the establishment of a theocratic parliament over the nation of Israel, right? Now, there was a lot of things that were actually quite admirable about Kahana, but one of the things that was not so admirable about Kahana is that he was very radical and indeed was very racist against Arab people. That has since caught on, especially with settlers in Judea and Samaria, and they are typically supporters of the Israeli right wing, i.e. the Likud. Now, of course, whilst there's a lot of things I sympathize with them on, for example, Judea and Samaria is their land. It is not the Palestinians' land. A two-state solution is not a good idea in any way, shape, or form. It is not their land to give up, quite frankly. But that does not mean that attacks against Arab children, attacks against Arab women, attacks against innocent civilians of any kind is justified. It does not mean terrorism is justified. And these same people who are committing these acts of terrorism against Arabs are the people I was just previously stating committing acts of terrorism and racism and things like that against Messianic Jews, against Karaite Jews, and so on, right? So there is a lot of controversy surrounding the Likud party at the moment, which, by the way, happens to have been the establishment party for almost 30 years at this point, right? The level of political domination that they have had over the state of Israel, Americans really haven't known for quite some time. There was a time in the United States when the Republican Party, right after the Civil War, had this domination for about 50 years. But none of us were alive to see that, right? When one party has the level of power that Likud has, even if they are a party founded in good political ideology, they are bound to get into these kinds of problems because they need to keep their own power. And that's precisely what we've been seeing here. And as a result of that, you know, this is obviously something, if Yehudah Glick could actually heal specifically these party rifts, but on top of that, the rifts that are actually existing in Israel as a whole, right, that would actually make him a very important figure to the people of Israel. So I just wanted to give that context so you guys understand both the rifts he's talking about and why the fact that he's a Likud member is actually relatively important. Excuse me while I take another quick drink of my tea here. I apologize. Glick asking the lawmakers to support him, so he was the only candidate for his role. Oh, sorry, I did that. Quote, I miss the days when we were a model society, a society of solidarity when we strove to be a light unto the nations rather than fighting and hating one another, he said. We can go back to that, end quote. Contacted by Zaman Yisrael, Glick did refuse to comment. Just a moment here. Wow, 47 minutes. I've already been going 47 minutes. You got to be kidding me. Time flies when you're providing these kind of information, man. Anyways, other rumored candidates for the presidency include Labor Party leader Amir Peretz. The Labor Party is essentially kind of a, it would be considered far left from American standards, semi-socialist party in Israel. Health Minister Yuli Edelstein is another one who said that he might be running, and Jewish Agency Chairman Isaac Herzog. So those are some of the other people who have been potential candidates for president of Israel here. Yuli Edelstein is kind of popular at the moment because he's the replacement for the failed prophet who actually replaced, or who actually was the health minister before him. There was a rabbi who actually prophesied that the Messiah would arrive on April of 2020 to free Israel of coronavirus, which obviously was important to him because he's a health minister, and he stepped down after that, of course, turned out to be false. So Yuli Edelstein was his replacement and has sort of been kind of, he's been kind of popular because he actually took a much more reasonable position on coronavirus and how to combat it. And by the way, I'm obviously a religious person. I don't say that to hate on, religious reasoning, but, quite frankly, we know, obviously, because we live in what is the future to him. This rabbi lied. He did not have any revelations about a Messiah. He wasn't talking to a Messiah, right? It was just not true. So, if you want to stick your political career on prophecies, then I guess you better make good ones. And you didn't. So he's out. Isaac Herzog is a little bit of an interesting case as well, but obviously, he's not nearly as interesting as Yehudah Glick is. He was a longtime member of the Knesset, about 15 years, just leaving actually recently, 2018. And he was elected the chairman actually of the Jewish Agency for Israel, which is a nonprofit organization all across the world. It's global, and it's dedicated to basically making sure that Jewish people have unity with each other in their diaspora, right? So he's kind of an interesting figure, but obviously the real interesting figure here is Glick. Glick, who is 55, a United States-born religious Zionist, which means that he actually believes there is a religious mandate for Zionism, which, to be fair, I actually somewhat agree with that. But nonetheless, I try not to base my political opinions off of just, straightforward readings of the Bible, because I do believe in separation of church and state, and I actually even think it's a biblical concept, and so did the guy who first formulated it in Western political thought, whose name was John Locke, but nonetheless. He was elected as the representative of West Bank settlements, but quickly proved to be open to all opinions and sectors, which made him a popular figure, especially outside Likud ranks, which of course gives him the potential to actually be elected. Glick, unlike other Likud members, denounced Israeli Defense Forces soldier Elor Azaria, who shot and killed a disarmed, wounded Palestinian attacker. Which, to be fair, that's obviously a good thing, right? Dead clock is obviously right twice a day. Excuse me one moment. My mouth is just getting really dry. Of course, that's why I have the tea in the first place. He also defended the leaders of the left-wing rights group, B'Tselem, which fellow right-wing MKs wanted to, fellow right-wing MKs wanted to revoke their citizenship. Which, by the way, once again, I think that's admirable, right? You shouldn't be able to revoke any Jews' citizenship in the state of Israel. There's a lot of things that are admirable about Yehudah Glick, and even more things that are admirable about the original controversial American rabbi before him, Mar Kahana. These people aren't necessarily evil men in the colloquial secular understanding of it, right? But what they don't understand is that they're useful idiots, and they might even be evil men themselves. Right. They're deceived, though, right? They are deceived into thinking that what they're going to do here is actually, going to benefit mankind, going to benefit the Jewish people, rather than potentially lead to global governance, a global religious bureaucracy, religious war, and so on, right? He angered Orthodox religious conservatives, the community from which he comes, by refusing to boycott Reform Jews. He also defended the leaders of the left-wing rights group B'Tselem and fellow. I just read that. My apologies. If Glick is elected, he will likely become the first president to enter the Temple Mount. Think about that. That is a hugely important thing, right? If Glick is elected. This is important. You guys need to understand this, right? If Glick is elected, and by the way, once again, Times of Israel, not a controversial InfoWars, Breitbart, conspiracy theory kind of news site. This isn't Stephen Banoon, right? This is the largest news organization in the entire state of Israel. But nonetheless, if Glick is elected, he will likely become the first president to enter the Temple Mount, Judaism's holiest site. It is also the third holiest site for Muslims, who refer to it as the Al-Aqsa Mosque Compound or the Noble Sanctuary, and many of whom reject the notion that it is holy to the Jews. And of course, this is one of those things, and maybe God has even set it up so that it is this way, where really you can't oppose Glick on this because he's right. That doesn't mean he's not a useful idiot. It doesn't mean that he's not a pawn in a greater scheme, but he is right that it is the Jews' holiest site. It is the Muslims are conquerors, right? They stole that site from the Jewish people, right? And actually the Christians had custodianship of it when they had stolen it, but nonetheless, it is not for them. It would be the same thing as walking down to Mecca and building a synagogue there, right? And that's where we're at, right? We're in a situation where the guy is right, but at the same time, he is absolutely becoming a pawn for some very dangerous, very globalistic, very ecumenical kind of things, right? Glick gained prominence through decades of struggle for Jewish prayer rights at the site, where Jews are currently allowed to visit during limited hours or on predetermined. Hang on, let me restart that. I kind of read that ridiculously. Glick gained prominence through decades of struggle for Jewish prayer rights at this site, where Jews are currently allowed to visit during limited hours on predetermined route and with heavy restrictions, but not pray or display religious or Israeli national symbols. Excuse me. Sorry, I just somewhat lost my place there, but I just found it here again. During those years, Glick has often visited the Temple Mount, protested near it, launched hunger strikes, and quarreled with police and law enforcement bodies. He has been barred many times from the site for weeks or months at a time. He insists that he seeks Jewish-Muslim coexistence at the site, and this is where you get to a lot of the useful idiot part, right? And I don't mean to say that rudely, but let's just call a spade, right? Let's be bold about truth here. Jewish-Muslim coexistence cannot possibly exist without some level of extra-Christian ecumenism, right? I use the term ecumenism to refer to all interfaith dialogue rather than just dialogue between other Christian denominations. So that's what he needs to establish. And of course, that's, that's a goal for a lot of people. Once again, I referenced Shimon Peres, who, by the way, was president of Israel. Isn't that interesting? Because that's what Yehudah Glick wants to be. Shimon Peres did actually go to Pope Francis in September of 2014 and say that he wanted Francis to head a United Nations of Religions, right? In fact, Brother Nicholas Whitmer is in the chat. You guys should check out A Rabbit Hole of Rabbit Holes on his channel. It's a show I've been doing with him where we discuss a lot of this, as well as numerous other things that the Catholic Church has been interested in. But nonetheless, I digress. This just randomly decided it was going to reload on me. My apologies. Come on, man. I hate it when the websites do this. He insists that he seeks Jewish-Muslim coexistence at the sites without limiting Muslim entry or prayer. He is nevertheless viewed as an extremist by many Palestinians, and incitement against him almost cost him his life in 2014 at the hands of a member of the Palestinian Islamic Jihad group, or is a Palestinian Islamic Jihad terror group, who shot him at close range following a conference in Jerusalem. Glick was critically injured, but made an unlikely full recovery. He was again assaulted this year while paying a condolence visit to the East Jerusalem home of the family of Ayad Halak, a disabled Palestinian man shot dead by border police officers who say they mistook him for an attacker. Which is interesting, right? Isn't that just the way that the left would be, to attack those who are even trying to reach out to them? Because let's be clear, right? Leftism is a spirit. It doesn't change when you go to a different country. But I digress. The Palestinians in Jordan would likely be angered if Glick is chosen as president, especially if he keeps going to the Temple Mount in this new role. On Thursday, Glick arrived near the compound in Jerusalem's Old City and blew a shofar in protest of Jewish entry being barred during the country's renewed lockdown to curb skyrocketing coronavirus infections. Just one more time. So My apologies, friends. Did not mean to have that occurring there. Had some internet issues. We'll go ahead and try to briefly finish this out. I appreciate you guys staying here with me rather than leaving the live stream. Let me know if you can hear me. It indicates on my side that it is up and working again, but of course, my side doesn't really matter if it's not working on your side. So, if you can, just give me a brief thumbs up if you can actually hear what I'm saying here right now. And then we'll just briefly finish this episode out because we are almost done. Excuse me. Actually hear what I'm saying here right now. And then we'll just briefly finish this episode out because we are almost done. Are you guys hearing me currently? Excuse me. Brother Nicholas, I see thumbs up. All right, we're good. Cool. All right, then. Let's see if my screen is still sharing. Are you guys hearing me currently? Brother Nicholas, I see thumbs up. All right, we're good. Cool. All right, then. Let's see. All right, so there we are. Let's go ahead and finish this out. So the Palestinians and Jordan would likely be angered if Glick is chosen as president, especially if he keeps going to the Temple Mount in this new role. On Thursday, Glick arrived near the compound in Jerusalem's Old City and blew a shofar in protest of Jewish entry being barred during the country's renewed lockdown to curb skyrocketing coronavirus infections. Glick and his wife, Hadass Disson, were handed an NIS 500 fine each for breaking the lockdown restrictions, barring residents from going more than a kilometer away from their homes. The officers ignored the couple's explanation that they were protesting an activity exempted from that rule. Which, of course, is interesting because you do see very similar things happening at the hands of statists here in the United States. And there is a lot that we could agree with Yehudah Glick, with Meir Kahana, with numerous figures on the right wing there in Jerusalem and at the Temple Institute here in Israel and so on and so forth. Right? There's numerous instances where we could actually agree with them. But that doesn't change any of the concern that we should have over this situation, right? That doesn't change in any way, shape, or form the importance of the fact that a global house of prayer at what is considered to be the holiest site in the world is currently trying to be reestablished by this group whose leader and founder now actually wants to be president of the state of Israel, right? Like this is very important stuff. And it comes, again, I would just specify, it comes in light of global ceasefire at the United Nations, union between the World Council of Churches and Rome, the Sino-Vatican Provisional Agreement, increased persecution of Messianics and Karaites, the Abraham Accords, Trump's Middle East peace plan, so on and so forth, right? Like there's so much that goes into why this is important. And by the way, I would just point out, 7 years is a long time. If he's elected, it would be from 2021 to 2028 that he'd be president of Israel. That's a long time. And some might even say 7 is a significant number, but I'll leave that for a more religious episode. But nonetheless, you guys see, of course, why this is such an important thing, why this is something that we want to stress and why we need to be aware of, even though it's not necessarily American politics, right? And I am noticing here, I am at about 65 minutes. I did just finish the article up there, so it looks like this will probably be a good place to stop. But I just want to let you guys all know, to wrap this up, Yehudah Glick is not the president of Israel currently. This could end up being a gigantic nothing burger, but it is very important that this man, this former head of the Temple Institute, this founder of the Temple Mount Heritage Foundation, wants to be the president of Israel, wants to be their ceremonial head of state for the next 7 years, and has the potential to do so amidst what is an incredibly controversial government that currently exists, headed by Benny Gantz and Benjamin Netanyahu. So, with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and bring us to a conclusion here. I want to briefly let you guys know you can actually find, or you will be able to, you can't currently, but you will be able to find links to everything we quoted here in the description below. I'll have those provided at least by tomorrow. I also want to let you guys know, if you're interested, you can actually follow me on numerous different social media websites. Just look up the Synagogue on Reddit, Parler, Gab, Instagram, Facebook, or Twitter, and you'll be able to find me. I go by numerous different usernames, but the Synagogue is my actual handle all the time. Or excuse me, other way around, numerous different handles, but the Synagogue is my actual username all the time. So just go ahead and look that up if you want to follow me there. If you like this content, if you think it's important, please throw a like, please subscribe, share this out to your friends on your social media platforms, to your family, etc. Get the word out. Make sure people are aware of this. And lastly, my friends, if you feel like this is important, if you feel like this is something that is worthy of your time, I do have a Patreon. I would appreciate anything you can give there. I assure you that everything is used for the purpose All right, guys. I'm not sure if you can see me, but I just I had a small issue with internet here. So just want to thank you guys for being here with us. Just want to ask, in the face of Armageddon, will you compromise? And of course, we want to make sure you guys have a great day. Shalom.